Well, hello there, fellow aspirants. I am Bill Whittle, a resident of the City of Angels. Welcome to Tinseltown. Your dreams of fame and fortune are just moments away, and I'd be the first person who'd be delighted to tell you that your pod is ready and waiting for you. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Otta. This right angle talks about the situation in Los Angeles, which continues to defy all attempts to classify it as a civilized nation. One of the things we just noticed in the newspaper was that the cost of living is now so high in Los Angeles that the American dream of better life for your children continues to advance. Because now, here in Los Angeles, in order to find a way to stay here and still be able to pay for food, you can now own, or rent, I should say, your very own pod. What's a pod, you may ask? Well, it's a small partition. In what might be a one-bedroom apartment, there would be 6 pods, little divisions that you can crawl into with a mattress, little place to hang your stuff. Then there's a communal bathroom and a communal kitchen. And your pod is available at a much reduced rate over what renting even a studio apartment would be. You'll be pleased to know that your very own pod can be made available for the low price of only $750 a month right here in the City of Angels. You can have your very own pod, and then from there, who knows where the limit is. Steve, I got out here in 88. I left in 92. I went back to Florida for 4 or 5 years. I went to Oaks Mall in Gainesville. I saw a real estate kiosk there, and I looked at some of the prices, and I thought these idiots left a digit off. It was really, truly, it was inconceivable. When the prices become so high that a pod, they're talking about doing the same thing for New York as well. Tokyo did this kind of thing with these kind of little cell hotels probably 15, 20 years ago. But the ones in Tokyo, of course, were nice. What does it tell you about a city that is so wrapped up in itself that I don't even know what to say. I don't even know what to say, really. I have to tell you, I'm a little flabbergasted on this one. I want to say to people, if you're coming here for the big Hollywood dream, you're in the wrong town. They're not here. They're shooting in Vancouver. Go to Vancouver. Anymore. Yeah. So people are spending outrageous amounts of money to live in one of the worst places in America, a third world city, which we talk about all the time as a cesspool of disease and typhus, plague, homeless people under every bridge. And you don't even get a chance to afford that.
Yeah, they've made 3 or 4 movies of this now, where formerly freedom-loving Americans are replaced in the night by pod people. And now they're getting charged for the pleasure. Let me give you a little perspective. I lived in San Francisco in the early 90s, and I rented a studio apartment. It cost $400 a month in a terrible part of town, the Tenderloin, as I'll discuss in some lurid detail in my segment this week. And it was a nice studio apartment in that the kitchen was separate instead of just being installed in one wall of the studio, and there was this walk-through closet on the way to the bathroom. So you actually kind of had rooms in this place. So it was much better than your typical studio apartment. $400. Out of curiosity, I looked up what that apartment is going for today, or at least an equivalent one in that building. Because you got to figure, okay, that was 1994 when I left. I was paying $400 a month, so it's probably got to be $900, maybe $1,000, adjusting for inflation. Apartments in that neighborhood, keep in mind, this neighborhood is much worse than it used to be. It used to be hookers and pushers, and now it's all that and so much more poop. And syringes and all the rest of the stuff that we didn't used to have to dodge over. Those apartments in that neighborhood are going for $3,000 or $4,000 a month. Way over what you would expect just from simple population or simple inflation or even population increase. So everybody is getting priced out of San Francisco already, and they've got similar things. I read a story that down at as you get down closer to Silicon Valley, they're taking apartments and installing what are essentially bunk beds in these studio apartments. So you're taking a place that was meant for 1, maybe 2 people and shoving 6 or 8 people in there. The rules are no sex, lights off at 10, And this is how young people are expected to live now, paying exorbitant fees for no fun. Guys, no wonder millennials are so bitchy and gripey and moany about everything. I would be too.
Well, that brings up the question, Scott, of what do you do if you can't afford a pot? One of the things that I've noticed, needless to say, the number of homeless people in this town has just utterly exploded. Within the last 2 or 3 years, there's hardly a freeway overpass that doesn't have at least one person under there. And a couple nights ago, my wife and I passed an overpass that took our breath away. It was a tent city. There were probably 100 people living underneath this one overpass. And one thing we've noticed about this current group of homeless people is that, to a much, much larger degree, these are not people who are either clearly alcoholic or suffering from some sort of terrible mental illness or drug addiction or something like that. We're seeing young, healthy, white kids, 20s, mid-20s, out there in tents underneath freeway overpasses and just spending either a night, a day, a week, or whatever out there. There was I don't know if it's been I hate to say the word cleaned up, but I once got a chance to know somebody who lived in a ravine up in the northern part of the valley. And inside this ravine were something like 400 or 500 people living in the dark, in tents, stabbing each other. You know, it's just a living nightmare here well, I almost said here in America, but we're talking about California. But my question for you, Scott, is this: what do you think is causing people who certainly seem capable of being able to afford some kind of housing for themselves? What is driving so many of them to just simply say, no, to hell with it. I'm going to just stick out my hand. I'm going to collect money. I'm going to live in a tent underneath the 405.
Well, first of all, I don't think we should make light of the crisis of American podlessness that you're discussing here. People living without, hearth and pod out there by themselves. Secondly, I think you need to know that those people living up in the ravine, that was the Manson family, and you should stay away from them. That whole clan is no good, and nothing good can come of it.
There's a whole city up there.
I think that that there is an allure of California that has outlived by decades the appeal of California, the true value of that, what used to be. I think people are going to California to see a place that doesn't exist anymore.
That's exactly right.
And then they get there, and they've spent everything they had to get there, and now they've got to find a place to sleep, and they don't have any friends whose couches they can crash on. So next thing you know, they're under a bridge. If I had $750 a month, by the way, I would lease a 2019 Mercedes Sprinter cargo van and get that thing tricked out on the inside. I mean, you could, if you're going to live under a bridge, you might as well do it in style. Just pull your Sprinter in under the bridge and tap into the city sewer system. There is a myth in America about housing that somehow it is inherently more expensive in some places, like there's more value to living in one place than another. You'd think that myth would have died with the advent of technology. Nobody has to live in Los Angeles anymore.
Precisely right.
Seriously. I mean, there was a day when you had to live in Los Angeles because you wanted to be near, the casting couch. But you don't have to do that anymore. The casting couch can come to you.
You can Skype it.
That's right.
Just Skype
you can
it in.
Totally Skype almost 90% of it.
This conversation took a weird direction.
That's right. Seriously, who wants to do this? You don't have to go there anymore. By the same token, I don't want you to come here. Okay,
that's
if you're
pretty
the
clear.
kind of person who was going to go to LA and wind up living in a pod or under a bridge, I'm sure there's still some vast tracts of plains out in the Midwest somewhere where you could move to and won't bother anybody. This is a natural consequence of the progressive left continually trying to reduce our footprint on Earth in every possible way. You notice there's been a whole rash in recent years of shows and magazines and books about tiny houses. And that they are oh so cute. And wouldn't we love to have a tiny house? I can't help but think, though, that there are a group of people behind that who are going, if we could get everybody living in tiny little houses, then that would eat up fewer resources and take up less land, and there'd be more room for the animals. And this pod kind of thing, I mean, they're just going to be stacking them in decks. It's going to look like that scene in The Matrix where everybody's kind of inside their own, bubble and's got a tube sticking out of the back of their head with wires and stuff. Don't get sucked into it. The American dream is not a white picket fence around a 12-foot pod.
No, because the fence costs more than the pod does. That doesn't make any sense. Right. Scott closed with something I think is not only interesting, but I think really the essential issue of things. Many people come out here to follow their dreams. I was one of them, and I was one of the lucky ones. I get to do what I want to do, and I haven't gone to work in 10 years. But when you get right down to it, the quality of life is the quality of life. You can follow dreams. You can do what you want to. And needless to say, for me, the ability to make a living as a writer was preceded by 40 years of being a limousine driver, security guard, waiter, temp at an insurance company, whatever I had to do in order to get the bills paid. But I went out and got the bills paid. And this doesn't seem to be what's happening. You're seeing more and more people deciding, no, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go do the whole work, a job I hate in order to pay the bills and keep myself afloat thing. I'm just going to bail. And that's basically kind of what it looks like. But, it's easy to joke about a pod, and we joke about it because if we don't joke about it, we're going to cry. This country was always about building a better future for the next generation, and it always had been. And now we're looking at a world where our country is in decline in so many places, and nowhere more so than in California, where this progressive philosophy began and where it is the most pernicious. We've done show after show. We did a number of them this week about what kind of a hellhole San Francisco's become, what kind of a hellhole Los Angeles has become. And strangely enough, by the way, that giant pile of garbage we did this show as well. Giant, enormous pile of garbage, which was breeding bubonic plague, and which would not be cleaned up by the government of the city run by Democrats, was eventually cleaned up by a conservative using his own money and his own time and volunteering people down there, and they just went and got it done. They got it done in a day. So what does all this say? I don't really know. I just know this. This is not what we had in mind. This is not the future we had in mind. We did not envision a future where our children and our grandchildren were going to be struggling to afford their own pod. And life in a pod is what you would expect life in a pod to be. You don't have to be here. I know this is rambling. I just don't know what else to make out of it. I can't make sense of it. The whole situation is so big and so overwhelming. There's so many threads tied together. But look, folks, you don't have to be here to be in the film business, because the film business isn't here anymore. Right. You can, I would much rather have, if I had to pick a place to get started and somebody offered me, in the film business, somebody offered me Los Angeles versus Charlotte, I'd take Charlotte in a heartbeat. But on a bigger level, you shouldn't have to settle for a pod. This should not be your fate. This is not your destiny, And I do think that when I see young people who are certainly capable of working and affording their own pod, when I see them in tents underneath a bridge, I have to ask myself, I know there are jobs available, and I know there are jobs available to people like this who are obviously decently educated and so on, and not infirm in any way. And something tells me more and more that on some level, these people have decided that there were jobs that they simply would not do, that they would rather just ditch the whole thing and live in a tent and have a handout rather than do certain amounts of jobs that they just didn't want to do, like being a temp in an insurance company, cross-checking binders full of computer printouts, which is something I did as well. I don't know what to say about that, but it just seems to me to be just yet another case of how the progressives and this agenda has robbed an entire generation of human beings of the promise of being a human being. It's not a question of having a big house. It's a question of having a home and a place that's yours where you're comfortable and happy and you can relax and have a good time and be able to breathe a little bit. This is not what we had in mind. And to the degree that it's caused by a breakdown in morality and a breakdown in family and a breakdown in culture, a breakdown in church or religion, all of it. we got ourselves screwed up. We can unscrew ourselves if we want to. And that is not something that happens by government decree or changing the government or California. That's something that happens when you make a decision to do that in your own life and just get up and go to work and do the job and come home tired, but with the fundamental pride that you did something today that you had to do. And, you know, man up, do it. Tired of you whippersnappers camping out on my lawn. Anyway, your pods in Charlotte are undoubtedly far cheaper than they are here. Stay there, and for God's sakes, don't go to Boise because they know they're really on to this whole thing, and they know that California. They just want to build a wall around California, and I'm 100% in favor of that idea. For Steve Green and Scott Ott, I'm Bill Whittle. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week on Right Angle.